Good evening. Thanks very much for coming out tonight to listen to this. So what I'd like to do in the next 45 minutes is discuss a little bit about what evidence-based management means, some definitions. I know some of you will be familiar with it. Give you an example of how you can start asking questions to do it, but focus particularly, I think, on some of the barriers to actually doing evidence-based management, because I've been interested in evidence-based practice for about 20 years now, and most notable to me, with some exceptions like ANU, it's not been massively picked up. People seem to find it difficult, or they don't do it, or not interested in doing it. So I think, as well as talk about evidence-based management and how you do it and the techniques, I think we need to start also thinking about, well, why is it difficult? Why aren't people doing it, and what can we do about that? So I'm going to conclude talking about some of the barriers and what we can do about it. So, my general assumption in evidence-based practice in any field is it's about saying, do you want to do stuff that addresses important business and organisational problems, and do you want to do stuff that's more likely to work? Or do you want to do trivial, silly things that are useless? Most of us would say we want to do things that are important and more likely to work. And the question is then, if you do want to do that, how are you going to do that? And to me, an answer to that question is something like evidence-based practice. Because if you don't take an evidence-based practice approach, you can't find out what's important, you can't find out what's more likely to work. So the kind of elevator pitch is the decisions about that, important problems and potential solutions, need to be based on the best available evidence. And in management, typically there are four sources. There's scientific evidence, there's our own experience as practitioners, there's what stakeholders believe, and there's also data from the organisation. And the crucial point here is that everybody uses evidence. You can't say this person is evidence-based, this person isn't, this practice is evidence-based, this practice isn't. There's always evidence, there's always information. Evidence-based practice has evolved to address two main, issues or weaknesses in the way we use evidence. The first is that people pay limited attention to the quality and relevance of evidence. Because we may be surrounded by all forms of evidence and data. A lot of it may not be very good quality, so we shouldn't pay much attention to it. Also, people tend to not look across multiple sources, and I'll go on to talk about why that's important. So, evidence-based practice has evolved not to make people use evidence per se, but to pay more attention to the quality and to use multiple sources. So, evidence-based practice is a thing. I didn't make it up, the Centre for Evidence-Based Management didn't make it up, ANU didn't make it up. It's been around for a long time, and it really got going as a way of thinking about how you practice in medicine. So from around 1990, medicine said evidence-based practice is the thing we should do. I'm sure most of you are quite relieved to know that evidence-based practice is now kind of established in medicine, although it still has some problems. And these are roughly the dates when other professions started to say, let's try and practice in an evidence-based way. Management and HR, you could argue, come to it sort of quite late. So different fields of practice have their own centres. This is medicine. Policing, anyone come across evidence-based policing before? Yes, some of you have. It's exactly the same thing. It's you're a police officer, you're a police service, you think you've got a particular problem, what's the evidence for that problem? What can you do about it? Well, what is the evidence about what's more likely to be effective? It's the same deal in every single area of practice. They're not particularly different. Evidence-based policy making, this is from, when Barack Obama was president of the United States, he was quite interested in evidence-based policy making. I'm not sure the current president of the United States is a massive fan of evidence-based policy making, I'm not sure. Conservation, education, aging care, social work, mentoring, it's all the same thing, and this is the Centre for Evidence-Based Management, which we started about eight or so years ago. And this is the Centre's book, which I forgot to include, that just came out. So, I know some of you know the answer to this, but if I said to you, what is evidence-based management? What does it look like? What is it? What would you sort of start to think? Probably, if you don't know the answer, probably data, probably information, maybe science. And interestingly, it has a very specific definition, and this is it. Again, it's not my definition, it's one that's used across different fields. It's a conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of evidence from multiple sources to increase the likelihood of a favourable outcome. So conscientious means you try. Obviously, explicit means you write it down, you codify it, you explain it. You don't just say, I know this isn't going to work, or I know it will work. And judicious means judging the quality of evidence. It's about a process. It's about, not about certainties, it's around probabilities and likelihoods. So this is quite an important point. The point about evidence-based practice is it's about going through a process of decision-making. It's not necessarily about guaranteeing any outcome. So this is an infographic that's produced by CIPD, which is the UK professional body for HR professionals and the Centre for Evidence-Based Management. And it's used first to identify if there's a problem. So one thing I think we observe often in management and other fields is people will take actions, implement solutions without knowing exactly if there's a problem or what kind of problem it is. So this is used first to identify a problem and then used to identify a possible solution or intervention. So there's the 4 sources, there's the definition, and these are the 6 steps. Ask a question, acquire the evidence, critically appraise it, pull it together by aggregation, apply it and then assess to increase the likelihood of a favourable outcome. Now sometimes people get quite hung up on this and they go, oh, 4 sources, can it be 3? Sure, it can be 2. 5 is good too. It's just to give you a sense of why multiple sources are important. Similarly, people say, well, do I have to go through 6 steps? Can't I just do 5? Yeah, sure. It's not about rigidly following it, it's about saying this is a guide to emphasise multiple sources and taking a structured approach. So, I'll give you an example. This is more from HR management. Who knows what employee engagement is? Anybody? Congratulations, because I don't, and I've been trying to work it out for some time, but it's a very popular concept within HR management organisations in general. Certainly I think in many countries in the world, including Australia, employee engagement is measured quite regularly as a kind of job attitude. There's lots of popular books about it. This is The Extra Mile, Engaged, even employee engagement for dummies to show how far this concept's got. Not just for dummies, employee engagement for everyone. Employee engagement 2.0, that's another book, Magic, employee engagement from Disneyland, The Truth About Engagement and so on. So this is a popular idea in management, and typically what you find in organisations is we were a group of managers, could be HR managers, we'd be concerned, we measure employee engagement using a survey, and we're concerned that our scores are too low. Now, as a word of warning, typically employee engagement scores are always too low. They're never too high, they're never just right, they're always too low, which immediately is kind of a big red flag that there's something wrong with this concept. But anyhow, how would you approach this problem and solution from an evidence-based practice perspective? Not what's the answer, but what kind of questions would you ask? So you have your survey data, we're sitting around looking at it, we're trying to say what should we do, we think it's too low. What question would you ask? So there's the 4 sources again. First, you look at your own expertise. What do we think as a group of professionals is going on here? Do we think there's a problem? Do we think there's an issue with employee engagement? And if we think there is, what do we think and believe about potential solutions? What do we think might work? And also, how relevant, applicable and trustworthy is our expertise? We always ask that for every source of evidence. Now, as managers, like in any kind of context, you learn expertise in a certain way. So just because you believe that there's a particular problem with engagement, just because you believe there's a cause of engagement, your experience might not be actually very trustworthy. But it's still vital for any area to ask that question because you will be still using that evidence as a practitioner, whether it's reliable or not. So it's about making it explicit and being judicious. Second area is organisational data. What actually is the engagement level? What do your scores show? Are they linked to, for example, outcomes? Typically, managers might think that if engagement goes down, performance goes down. But actually, is there evidence for that in your organisational data or not? And if there is, and it seems to be a problem, is there evidence about what might work to change engagement scores, to put them up? Is it worth intervening to do it? And again, how relevant, applicable and trustworthy? Third area, the scientific literature. If you go and look at the evidence and say, what's the scientific evidence about that low engagement is a problem? Are there like lots and lots and lots of really high quality studies that indeed show that if engagement goes down, performance goes down? Is there one study? Are there no studies? Are there 10 very poor quality studies? What does the scientific evidence say is another source? And similarly, is a source of information about intervention. If it is a problem, what do we know about interventions? And again, how relevant, applicable, and so forth. Fourth area, just examples of questions, stakeholder. How do employees feel about it? If you talk to employees and say, we think we've got a problem with low engagement, what do you think? You might be quite surprised about what they say. Or if you talk to customers, you might say to customers or clients, we think there's a problem with employee engagement, and they say, well, that's interesting, because when I call the call centre, when I come into your office, your staff are incredibly helpful and very engaged. That's quite interesting, because then they may say, what kind of a problem is this if our customers don't think it's a problem? And similarly, if they do, then what about sort of solutions and intervention? How do employees feel about it, and so on? And again, how relevant, applicable, and trustworthy. So there's some of the questions you might ask. Does it feel completely exhausting and boring? What do you think? Yeah, a bit boring? Yeah, it is a bit boring. Because the point about evidence-based practice is not to be exciting, it's to try and make a better informed decision. And that process is not necessarily intrinsically fun. It's not kind of meant to be, but it is helping to make a better informed decision. Does that make sense to you? What do you think? Audience response time.
Yes.
Thank you. Any immediate concerns? Can you imagine doing that, or can you imagine your organisation doing that? Concerns? A bit of, is that head wiggle, or was your neck just sore? Maybe sore. Any concerns? I'll give you some concern in a minute. What about, do you think it's doable? Is that doable? How long would that take an HR team to do? What do you reckon? A month? A couple of weeks? Yeah? 12 months? Your life? It could. The good news is you can do that in half an hour. You can do it in an hour, you can do it in 2 hours. The point is to go through the process. If you went through that process as a manager, as an HR team, you might say, you know what, we've only got 2 hours, 3 hours to do this. What do you think about this? Let's try and get an answer. Often the answer to those questions will be, I don't know. What about this? Yeah, we've got some evidence, it's not great about the cause, not too sure. What about solutions? Similarly, scientific literature, I've gone to Google Scholar, I found one not very good study. What does that say? Oh, I don't know, it's probably okay. Anything with interventions? No, not really, blah, blah, blah. You go through that process, and you can still make a decision. The point is, you know the basis on which you made that decision. You could decide to do something, you decide to not do something, but you know why you made that decision. And the next time you make a similar decision, you might spend a bit more time on it. So the point about evidence-based practice is you can do this very, very quickly if you want, if you're time constrained. But you're still likely to make a better quality decision by going through this process than not doing it at all, if that makes sense. In other words, even if you only spend an afternoon on it, rather than not doing it at all, you're more likely to identify whether there's a problem or not, you're more likely to identify a potential solution. So it's not about perfection. I'll come back to that again in a minute. Okay, so nobody, I think, in principle disagrees with evidence-based practice, although you might tell me different. Does anyone disagree with it? I'm not sure, maybe not, no? Okay, we'll come on to that if you do. The question for me then is, why isn't it happening? And I've been frustrated when I've done teaching and training around this, that people seem to get it, they sort of quite like it, and then I meet those same people sometime later and say, are you doing this? And they go, nah, not really, not so much, a little bit. And I think, is it me? Did I do something wrong? It could be me. But I think it's about the constraints we all work under in organisations. So there's lots of them. I'm only going to talk about some of them, probably the first kind of 4 or 5 or something. I think other things that get in the way are things like good intentions. So there's some areas in management where people feel there's something really bad going on and they must do something. In that kind of context, people tend to lose sight of evidence-based practice. They just want to do something. They don't really sort of care about what it is in a way, apart from the feeling of doing something. I think people often overclaim stuff. I think organisational politics gets in the way when people just want to do things and actually care about the evidence, they just decide they want to do it. So lots of things get in the way. I'm just going to talk about some. Misconceptions. The first is that I think people believe things about evidence-based practice that aren't quite right, and that stops people from wanting to do it, being able to do it. The first thing they think is that it means I can't use my experience as a manager. And I hope I made it clear, of course you can, you must, it's one of the 4 sources of evidence, of course you do. People also feel evidence tells you the truth and can prove things. What is truth? Are we expecting that question tonight? How many times has that question been asked in this building? Or indeed on this campus, or indeed in this city? What is truth? I don't know, but I don't think it's in a spreadsheet. I don't think it's in a research. That's not truth. Truth is something rather different. I'm not being post-truth. I just mean truth is some absolute idea. And we're not after that. Similarly, can you prove things with science, with data? No. You get more and more information about likelihoods and probabilities. Even a field of science where there's lots and lots of studies, done quite well, experimental studies, it's always provisional. A new study could come along that suggests the method isn't very good, or in fact it's misleading, or in fact there's something wrong with the way the data are placed, or finds a completely different result. So again, we're not trying to prove things, we're not trying to find the truth, we're simply trying to make a better informed decision. But sometimes when people go into this, they feel, What's the point in doing this unless I know everything and I can prove everything of what I'm doing? We're not trying to do that. We're trying to make a better informed decision. But I think that's a barrier. People also think it's about making a perfectly informed decision. No. People also feel gathering all the evidence will give you the answer. And no, it doesn't, because what happens typically, the more information you get about something, the more elaborate your understanding gets. There's more than one answer, there's more than one problem. Now you could see that as a failure, or you could see that as the fact you've learned something about how to probably do your job better. So it depends how you view that. Also, some people feel we're doing it already. You know, what is this evidence-based practice? We always do that. Yeah, evidence-based practice. Yeah, you always use evidence, but I think there's three main differences between what we do already in evidence-based practice. The first is the approach to evidence. Conscientious, explicit, judicious. It's kind of a commitment to trying to use it. So we all use evidence, but do we take a particular approach? I don't think so. Multiple sources. We always use maybe one source, two sources, but we don't consciously try and look across multiple sources, both to triangulate and also to contextualise. So for example, you might have one source of evidence, say scientific evidence, and you've got an incredibly strong body of evidence about some management technique will have some effect. That in and of itself is pretty useless. You need to contextualise it. What about your organisational data? What about your stakeholders? What about your experience? Your organisational data might show that that intervention, based on a lot of good scientific studies, actually isn't relevant to your context, or might not work, or indeed might be counterproductive. So even one source of very good evidence is not enough to tell you that you should just do that thing. You need those other sources too. The third difference, I think, is a structured and stepped approach, where you get evidence for a problem and then you try and implement a solution. We're easily distracted and pushed off course. Sticking with a process is ideal, it helps us stick with it, and there's many structured obstacles that get in the way. So when people say they're already doing evidence-based practice, and people have often said that to me in evidence-based management, I ask them the question, how have you looked across multiple sources? How have you critically appraised it? Did you do it in a typically, they mean, I had some data. And that's great, but it's not the same as evidence-based practice. And I think that's a barrier, because if you don't know what something means and what it is, it's pretty hard to do it. And I think if people think they're already doing it, they're just not interested. So I think explaining what it is a really important part of actually overcoming this barrier. There's also some misconceptions of the role of science in evidence-based management. We're into all of these, but things like breakthrough studies or the latest ideas are the best. These are kind of studies you might see in Nature, or these luxury science journals, as they're called, that kind of produce hyper-exaggerated, new, exciting findings sometimes. Single scientific studies can be important, not really. Single study doesn't really matter. It's just a single study. Maybe if you've got a whole bunch of studies, yes, you can start to look at that as scientific evidence. Firstly, the peer-reviewed journal stuff can also not be trusted. Of course it can't. There's all kinds of problems with the peer review process and publishing more generally. Science is the highest quality evidence you can get? No, depends on your question. Scientists themselves are reliable sources of evidence. Of course they're not. Don't believe what scientists tells you about particularly their work. They might be able to explain methods, other things, have a view about it, but scientists themselves are the worst source of information about scientific evidence, because what's the bias? Doing randomized controlled trials or nudge stuff provides all of the best scientific evidence you need. No, it doesn't. It provides some, but it's only one source again. And you get expressions like science shows, studies find, we know from science. No. What do we know? We know that there are some studies that show this, some studies that show that. They're not very good, maybe they're quite good. We've done in this context, that's what we know. We don't know from science stuff. It doesn't really work like that. And also neuro whatever is the best science, because it's about the brain. And if you study HR or marketing or leadership, you'll find a lot of neuro stuff. And if you're interested in trying to follow some Twitter accounts that try and debunk sometimes these exaggerated claims about neuroscience, I find these to be quite useful sources. Okay, the second barrier is cognitive biases. You'll be familiar, I think, some of you with this, the idea of system and assistant thinking. It's only general categories, not that clear cut. System one is very fast, emotional, intuitive. It's what we use most of the time for most things we do in everyday life, and it's perfect. System two is the slower, more deliberative, harder work. And the idea is we're hardwired to make sort of system one decisions because they're just kind of easier for us and we do it more all the time. However, in evidence-based practice, the kind of critical thinking you need is the same. It doesn't. You can't do it through system one. You need to stop, slow down, not use your intuition, and actually process information. So the idea is it gets in the way. So as well as sort of other kind of cognitive things, there are lots of visual illusions. So if you look at this, for example, so as most of you know, these lines are parallel, but they look wonky, right? How would you find out if they were straight or wonky? What would you do? Yeah, you can use a ruler, or you can actually look down the side of the slide. Feel free to do it. Look down the side of the slide and you'll see they're parallel. And doing that shows the basic principles of evidence-based practice and using evidence. It looks like that. Can I just check it somehow? It looks wonky, let me check it. And that's true of a spreadsheet, a journal article, qualitative data, looking at your own experience. I think that's the case. Is there another way of kind of checking that? So you shouldn't just take what you see in any kinds of data or evidence at face value. Here's another one. Of course, all the evidence are the same size, a little different. This is the most extreme version of the wonky line. I think those lines are in fact parallel. Apart from measuring it and looking down the side, what is the other way of trying to check that? If you put your hands in front of your face and cover up some of the visual field, you can sometimes squish it and you can actually start to see that they're actually parallel. I don't know if that's working. Maybe I made that up. Is that working for anyone? No? Okay, I probably just made it up. I apologise. It can work. Oh, what's this? Who recognises this? Extra points if you know what this is. Come on, I bet someone here knows. Cotter. Cotter's model of change. Is this an illusion? Or is it real? And those of you who've been exposed, I mean, for those of you who don't know, people in organisations really do use this as a model of managing change. Some of you may have actually used it as a model of managing change. The question is, it looks perfectly reasonable, but is it? Or is it an illusion? And I think there's lots of illusions like this in management. This is just a weird, what happens if you stay in the middle of that? Does anything happen? Depends a bit on the lighting conditions, it might be too light at the front. They kind of start to rotate a bit. And if they are for you, this is another great example. So these lines look like they're going into each other, but actually if you just trace any of the lines around, you'll see they're actually all completely separate. It looks like they're interlinked, but they're not. Here's another possible illusion. This is back to employee engagement. So on the left we have these engagement drives, on the right we have engagement outcomes, and it leads to satisfaction, wellness, blah, 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 blah. Again, is that an illusion or is it real? You need to check it out. What happens when you look at this? How many dots can you see? Probably the most you can see at any one time is about 4. And as you look at different parts of the screen, you see that they seem to move around. What did it say in that triangle? Paris in the spring? Who thinks it said Paris in the spring? Put your hand up. Who thinks it said something else who hasn't seen it before? Paris is. Paris is spring. Okay? So anyone else think they see anything else? Okay, I'll show you again. You ready? You're looking really, really hard. Yeah, 2 thus. And this is a great example of where our system 1, which is actually, without system 1 we couldn't really read quickly. It'd be really hard to actually get through 1 paragraph in an hour. The reason we read fast is because we just skim over it, because we just process stuff information. And it's that great thing about a system that helps us read quickly that at the same time leads to that error. So it's not that we're stupid or smart, we're both. And sometimes the things that make us smart in other contexts like this can make us make mistakes. Okay, this is a classic one. Put your hand up if you've seen this before. Okay, you're not allowed to answer. Those who haven't seen it before, I'll give you 10 seconds to give me an answer. Yeah, you can adjust the exchange rate and you can do it in dollars and cents if you want. Yeah. Okay. You know it's a trick question. You know you're probably going to get it wrong. Does anybody want, what's the number you want to say? Anybody? 10, okay. Put your hand up if you think it's 10. Really? What are the rest of, what are the rest of you think it is then? 5. Put your hand up if you think it's 5. Wow. Put your hand up if you are just not going to put your hand up. Yeah, I thought so. That's a few people. Yeah, so most people say 10. I said 10 when I first saw it. But actually the right answer is 5. So the people you said, how did you get to 5? You worked it out, but we want to know how you worked it out. Did you hear that? Right. So what you said is, I worked out what happened when you take 10 pence away from a pound and gave half to each. Who thinks like that? You do. Yeah, and probably some of you others do. So if you've got a method, and you have a method for doing it, you look at that and you know that kind of puzzle, and you've got an algorithm almost in the way of doing it. And other people use algebra, they look at that and have a formula. I don't. And if you don't have a technique, the first thing you come up with is 10 pence. You can also check it, because if it is 10 pence, by the way, do any of you still think it's 10 pence? Yeah? That is a problem. Is some of you will, I'm going to tell you it's 5 pence, and you know it's not 10 pence, but you'll still think it's 10 pence. Yeah. Maybe for days to come, for the rest of your life, it will torment you like some horrible recurring nightmare. Yeah, because it can't be 10 pence because we've got other buys at £1.20. So the ways of dealing with it, but again, it looks like it's 10 pence, but it isn't. So we're also, another barrier is these cognitive biases, and the main issue is, there's all kinds of biases. Confirmation bias, where we look for information consistent with our beliefs, and this is an absolutely everyday classic thing we all do. But the worst bias of all is the one at the bottom, the metacognitive bias, the belief that we don't have any biases. And that's something that I think really acts as a barrier, because we all feel we're pretty smart, we can look at evidence and data, yeah, we can work it out, we can see it's 10 pence next, but maybe we're wrong. Another example, strong and wrong beliefs. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure just ain't so. Hawking saying, same thing really. The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge. Why is ignorance okay? What's the advantage of ignorance?
You know you don't know.
Yeah, you start from scratch, you know you don't know, so you ask questions. If you think you know something, then you just stop thinking about it, right? I just know that. If you're right, that's fine. If you're wrong, that's kind of a problem. And I think in management and HR, my field of management, there's lots of these kinds of beliefs. I'm afraid I haven't got any Australian data, I apologise, I have no opinion about this. Job tenure, if you imagine the UK and the US, the average amount of time people spend in a job, over the past 10 years, do you think job tenure has gone up, down, or stay the same? Do you think people are staying in jobs longer? Do you think they're staying in jobs for less time? Do you think it's about the same? So who think it's gone up? People staying in jobs longer? 1 or 2 people? Now I think you're getting the hang of this. You're just going to think, I'm going to give the opposite answer to the one I was going to give. Who thinks it's gone down? Oh, I said that already, yeah. People staying in jobs less time, down. Yeah, most people think that. Who thinks it's about the same? Actually, quite a few people as well. So this is data from the UK. This is a report done, published around 2010. So a number of studies suggest the average amount of time people spend unemployed did not shift greatly between the mid-1970s and the mid-2000s. Average job tenure appears to have increased slightly in recent years, consistent with falling job turnover. That's the UK. This is the US. This is median job tenure. And as you can see, it hasn't really changed very much. So quite often we have these beliefs. If I'm talking to HR managers in the US or the UK, most of them think job tenure is going down. Also, most of them think the percentage of the workforce in permanent employment has gone down. Why? Because of things like the gig economy. But in the UK, and these are actually quite similar results in the US, this is the number of permanent employees over a 20-year period, and you can see that broadly speaking, in the whole labour market, it's really hardly changed. So whenever you hear people banging on about the gig economy, ask them to show you a bit of data about how big it really is. Doesn't mean there's nothing happening. Why do people believe this? Because they see Uber, they see Deliveroo, because it's quite salient to them. They imagine everybody has those kinds of jobs. No one has permanent jobs anymore, but it hasn't really changed very much, at least on a national level. So the problem with those wrong, strong and wrong beliefs, it might affect the way you recruit, it might affect the way you would try to retain people, because you have this background belief about what's going on in the world. Management fads and fashion. So management is very fond of a fad or fashion, I think, in particular HR management. These are some older fads, re-engineering. Anyone remember In Search of Excellence? Yeah, wasn't that great? In Search of Excellence, total quality management, I'm sure you've heard of that. The war for talent. Do you remember that? Who won? I kind of forgot. Who won that? Lean production. Employee engagement, another kind of fad, you could argue, employee engagement. And people got quite interested in management fads because they're quite prominent sometimes. If you go to a classic airport bookshop, you know, it has, a lot of the non-fiction stuff is all about, you know, new ideas, exciting things in management you should do. And what's quite perhaps surprising is those ideas do get taken quite seriously, to the extent that organisations will adopt them and try and use them and then normally drop them again. And those of you who've been around for a while in organisational life will see not only the same thing coming around again, but the same thing coming around again with a different name. It's been kind of rebranded or repackaged. So people try to trace things like management by objectives or just in time, 1 minute manager. What's the problem with business fads, business fashions? I think fads get in the way of clear and critical thinking. Also, they encourage something called solutioneering. Solutioneering, you'll be familiar with it, maybe not the name. It's where you identify a problem by the absence of the solution. The problem is, we don't do emotion intelligence training. That's the problem. That isn't a problem. That's an intervention. What's the problem? The problem is we need to increase our engagement scores. Do you? Maybe the problem is there's an issue with performance. Why do you need to increase engagement scores? The problem is we don't have a talent management strategy. So this encourages solutioneering because we see this fad or fashion, we think that will help us with our problem. We actually don't know what the problem is yet, or the issue is. So fads may be effective, but often not panaceas. If they work, their effect may not be large. They may be no better than stuff you're already doing anyway, and they can be harmful. They can be harmful, and they're over-applied. So some of these ideas might work in some context for some things. The danger is everyone starts copying it. How can you spot a liking management fad? Well, it's buzzy and exciting. And this is something that always gets me when I hear managers talk about things like, hey, there's this really cool idea. I came across this really awesome thing. You're thinking, no, you're a manager, you're not buying a pair of trousers. You know, you're not deciding, you know, to download some music from a new band. You're trying to make a proper decision. So that should be a huge red flag. If you think something's cool, and you're trying to make an important decision, you probably should stop and think. So they often make massive claims to no good quality evidence, often involve management gurus and superstars. It's all good. It's presented as a universal panacea and often uses unverifiable anecdotes and success stories, which is the company of our day that people always give an example. You know, this company does this, isn't it marvellous? Apple or, yeah, Google. Drives me nuts. Those of you involved at all in teaching students in business schools, as I am, will find that students cannot resist mentioning Google in whatever the essay or assignment is about. A while ago I used to teach leadership, and I say to the students, this essay is nothing to do with a particular person. Steve Jobs. This essay is not about Steve Jobs. Don't write about Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is completely irrelevant to this essay. And still about a quarter will come back talk about Steve Jobs. So I think there are these obsessions we have, and of course we don't know with a company like Google. We don't really know what they do. We can't really verify it. We can't see the data where they claim, oh, we did this and it was marvellous. And frankly, Google would be extremely successful no matter how well or badly it was managed. It's a gold mine. You don't need to manage a gold mine that well. It's just dig it out and there's the money. And that's pretty much Google, I think. They also seem to involve new words which don't describe anything new. So particularly again, in some areas of management, we have now, instead of data or measures, we have metrics. Instead of doing data analysis, you have analytics. Does anyone know what the difference is between data analysis and data analytics? A measure and a metric, anyone? Yeah? About 50k, I like it, yes. Yeah, right, I think it is about 50k. That's the difference. So it's really true. And my pet theory about this is because measures and analysis has a soft ending. And it sounds a bit wimpy and not very kind of macho. Whereas analytics and metrics sounds a bit tougher. I think that might be why it's the case. But yeah, new words that don't really mean anything new. Why do people go with fast? Because it's cool, it's fun, it's neat. Say, fine if you're buying a pair of trousers or whatever, it's not fine for other things, it's defensive. If you're doing it and the other company's doing it, you can't get into trouble. People think the latest thing is the best thing, etc., etc. And if others are doing it, surely it works, and you have to think less, cognitive ease. Who's got a kitchen cupboard at home with electrical kitchen equipment in, which they basically never really use anymore? Right, what is in that cupboard of shame, please, madam? Popcorn maker, disgraceful. What's in your cupboard of shame?
Juicer.
Juicer?
Pie maker.
Okay, pie maker, anything else? Stuff like this. Now, some of you, like a juicer, I often wonder, and I don't know why, but I often wonder what percentage of all the juicers sold in the world are used for more than about 2 months. I reckon it's about 10%. I think the other 90% are in that cupboard of shame. We see this stuff and we think it's going to help us. And I think kind of that's what managers do. They see these fads, these fashions, these new ideas, and they think that's really going to help me. That will be really good. I'll get that. But they don't know if they really need it or if they want it. And it ends up in the equivalent of the management cupboard of shame. This kind of stuff. Now this is a personal example, just to prove I'm exactly the same. Anyone here ever bought Banana Guard? Banana Guard? Yeah? Yeah? Do you use your Banana Guard? Why not? Why not? It was to make my son take a banana to school, but it didn't work. Anyone else not bought for themselves? No one's got a Banana Guard. Yeah? You love your Banana Guard. Do you use it regularly? Okay. So you know what Banana Guard is to stop your banana getting squashed, obviously, in your bag, yeah? Well, maybe for your son. So when I saw this, I thought, oh, that's really great, I'm going to get a Banana Guard. In fact, I bought a couple, one for my mate or something as well. And I got this Banana Guard. The next day I put a banana in it, I put the banana in my bag, went off, oh, I've got a banana. So I opened the banana, eat the banana, great. Next day I did exactly the same thing, banana in the Banana Guard, in the bag, and I kind of forgot it was in there. So for a few days, I kind of this smell of banana was following me around for a while, and I dug into my bag, found the mouldy banana. And I put the Banana Guard on the kitchen counter, and some months later, gathering dust, and I just recycled it. And then I thought, why did I buy it? It's the same reason I think people buy management fads. I saw this, and it created in my mind an opportunity and a problem, which I didn't really have. The opportunity it created was, oh great, I can carry bananas around, great. But honestly, in my life, I am never more than about 4 minutes away from a banana. Where's the nearest banana to here? Where's the nearest banana to here? I mean, it's probably downstairs, there must be a shop around here or a cafe or something. I don't need to carry bananas, I'm not trekking across the Himalayas. So I thought this would help me with something I wanted to do, which is carry a banana. I don't want to carry a banana. The second thing I thought it would help was to help that banana I didn't need to carry from not getting squashed. And seriously, as I thought about it, I couldn't actually remember an occasion when I ever really had a squashed banana in my bag. So it was completely and utterly pointless. But if you'd been in that shop with me when I saw it, and you said, Rob, do you really need that? Guess what I would have said? Yeah, it's cool, I like it, don't shut up, I want it. And that, I think, is pretty much what happened to management fads. Now, if you look at these Banana Guards on Amazon, these are the things people who bought Banana Guards also buy. One is a fruit Flaces inflatable fruit case. Anybody got one of those? That's quite niche. So basically it's an inflatable case, you blow it up and you put like a soft fruit in, it's got a zip around it, same principle, maybe you should try one of those with your son. It stops the fruit getting squashed, is the idea. So obviously the person that bought the Banana Guard has a bit of an issue with squashed fruit. Probably goes back to childhood, probably an incident in the playground, I don't know. The second thing people buy that also bought was a banana tree, and that's to do with, I don't know, if you like bananas, and you're not supposed to put bananas in a fruit bowl and have a kind of whatever. The third thing they bought is a banana-shaped stress reliever. Now that's one of those squishy foam things, and you know, if you think about it, if you are anxious about having squashed bananas in your bag, how is squeezing a foam banana going to relax you? I mean, it's just going to make you worse, unless it's some kind of funny. So management fads. The fifth and final barrier I talk about, and I draw things to close it, is management career incentives. And this is something I noticed particularly when talking to ex-students or people I've taught or trained or something, say, oh, you think evidence-based management? Go, no, I'm not really, did not do it, Bob. Or not much. And I sort of say, well, why is it? And one of the things they say is about what they're incentivised to do, or punished to do. They are often told or encouraged to do stuff rather than doing stuff well. Often the way managers are evaluated, the performance is measured, is by, have you done all that stuff? And if you do all that stuff, that's good. Is that stuff good? I don't know. Did that stuff work? Who cares? Did you do the stuff? I did the stuff. And not only that, people are kind of rewarded for often doing a lot of stuff. And there is a tendency, I think, sometimes, and you may know people, maybe you are one of those people, you sometimes work with people who are brilliant at getting stuff done, and they do lots of stuff. And they kind of might annoy a few people along the way. And actually, they do get stuff done, but they don't do it very well. And then amazingly, they get a promotion. And then amazingly, you find out 3 years later on LinkedIn, they've got another promotion to a really high level in the organisation. You think, they're just not very good at it. They're good at doing stuff, they're really good at doing good stuff. But somehow they're being rewarded by doing more and more and more and more. And that's not that person's fault, that's the incentive system in an organisation. It's about doing stuff rather than doing what works. Also, they may do what will please, not annoy the boss. They also may focus on behaviours that will lead to promotion or bonuses. And unless the organisation is prepared to support evidence-based management, it's quite hard to engage in behaviour which involves asking questions, which involves maybe slowing down, which involves saying, why do we think that will work? Which involves questions like, why are we doing that? Now, in some organisations, you will not make yourself very popular if you do that. In others, maybe some you will. But that's an incentive or something gets in the way. Basically, why would those managers be interested in evidence-based practice? It's not in their interests. But it's not their fault, it's the context they're in. So, summary so far, evidence-based practice is about using the best available evidence. Management's profession is not particularly evidence-based, and there are many, many barriers. So, if I want to talk about barriers, I want to give you one analogy. So, as I said, one of the differences between what we normally do in evidence-based practice is we use multiple sources. And the idea of using multiple sources and going through that process is it means we're always more likely to get the outcome we want. It doesn't guarantee it, even if we don't have much time. If you go to a new city you've never been to before, you arrive at the hotel, say, at 6 o'clock in the evening, and you really, really, really want to have a nice dinner in a restaurant, what sources of evidence would you use to try and choose a restaurant? Anybody, what would you do? Google?
Look at a busy restaurant.
Okay, so a concierge, busy restaurant, TripAdvisor. Okay, can you trust the concierge?
Probably kickback.
Kickbacks. Would you still ask them? Maybe. Busy restaurants. Which restaurants in many cities are likely to be most busy? McDonald's. Okay, well, maybe. TripAdvisor, is that reliable? Not really. But if you go through that process, concierge, TripAdvisor, other reviews, maybe ask friends, you're more likely to get a better dinner than if you go to one source. That's the kind of idea, or don't do that at all. So if you understand that principle, you understand the principle why looking across multiple sources is a good idea. So, overcoming barriers. Well, working in teams and groups is important to avoid this lone wolf issue. I think making a public commitment is also important. If an organisation or manager wants to do it, say that's what we're doing. I think we need to understand more about why it's hard. It's okay to say this is the evidence-based practice process, why don't you do it? I think we also need to understand more about what makes it difficult, because I think it is difficult for people to do it. Maybe provide support and emphasise again and again, it's about better informed decisions, about perfectly informed decisions. And also bear in mind, it's not for everyone, or every organisation, or every problem. And I think some of us who really believe strong evidence-based management think it is, but I don't think it is. So maybe we need to focus on people who will benefit most from it in different contexts. How can the management profession become evidence-based? I think more time spending about getting information about real problems, ask the question why a lot. I think a lot more humility about what we don't know, more of our own evaluations, try and avoid solutioneering, the banana goer problem, healthy skepticism, think why do we have to follow these fads, where's the benefit? And also use evidence-based practice decision support, such as even that simple infographic I showed you. What are the disadvantages? Well, there's quite a few. It challenges your prejudice and pet projects. It requires harder work. You have to get more data, makes it hard to follow fads. It means people can't say, because I say so, if you're a manager, or just effing do it. Or hippo decision making. Who knows what hippo decision making is? highest paid person's opinion. And you'll find this, and I think most people experience, you're sitting around a room, no one knows what to do, everyone looks around, you've had a long discussion, and then they'll go to the person who's paid most and say, what do you think about it? And also it reduces the action orientation of staff, of people as well. People want to do stuff. They are disadvantages, but actually I think they're also potentially advantages. And also, I think doing evidence-based practice means you develop deeper knowledge and understanding of your work and the organisations in which you work. If you don't do something like evidence-based practice, you will keep doing stuff, but you won't quite know the base on which you did it, you won't quite know where they worked, but you just carry on doing stuff without really learning, without probably getting better at doing what you're supposed to be doing. So I think that's another reason to do it. And finally, if you agree with that, and you see at the beginning, it is the only way we can do stuff that addresses important problems and do stuff that's more likely to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I'm Alessandra Capezio from ANU, and it's over to you now for some questions. I'll stay on this side.
Thanks, Rob. I work quite a lot in risk management, and I see some of the same problems. I mean, one of the biggest things is fear, that it's going to show things that people didn't understand.
Yeah.
The other problem is that now people pretend to do risk management, and it usually comes down to ticking boxes and putting a signature on a page. Do you see anything like that? Are there any sort of pretenses at doing evidence-based management, and how do they sort of try and cover over the fact that they're not?
That's a really good question. I think risk management in terms of being embedded in organisations is much more so. I think there's more techniques, more checklists, more other kinds of things. I think we're not at that, even at that stage yet. I think the only way people pretend they're doing or say they're doing it is when they actually don't know what it means. So that people regularly, I know on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever, will say, I'm doing evidence-based management. And about every 6 months, I put out a tweet saying, is anyone doing evidence-based management? And I show the infographic. And normally I get 4 or 5 responses. And I always get back to them. Sometimes I have phone calls, sometimes I have arguments with people on the phone. And I say, look, yes, you're using evidence, you're not doing that. So I think the most, what people do is say, I'm doing it, but they don't really know what it means. But we're not at the risk management. But I think risk management frameworks is another way of framing this, actually. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. Before I ask my question, I'll just make one very super quick suggestion, and that is, given I suspect you're not in Australia very often, it might be worth catching a very good comedy that deals with sort of HR issues called Utopia, and there's some nice scenes in there.
Okay, thank you.
But my question is, what proportion of sort of be it business entities, government agencies, etc., in your experience actually do HR well, and are there any you can name who actually really do it well? Because certainly my experience over more than 3 decades is nothing but cringeworthy.
Yeah, you mean HR in particular?
Yes.
And you mean, are they doing something like evidence-based practice?
Well, I'd say they don't.
Well, that's what, so quite often, for example, journalists will say, so thank you for talking about evidence-based management, now can you give me the example we can go and talk to? And I really struggle. I haven't, and it could be, of course, because I just don't know anything about them, but I've yet to come across an organisation that's sort of really trying to do this and talks about doing it and tries to stick at doing it. There may be thousands that I will know about, but I haven't seen it. So that's where we are. That's why the whole point about it is actually thinking about the barriers, because no one sort of disagrees with it, but people find it very difficult. Not because they don't understand it. I think that's the easier part. It's harder to do it in practice, I think. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for such a good talk. Just starting with just a comment, I have met a lot of people who very similar type of ideas coming out of Nassim Nicholas Taleb in Fooled by Randomness. They just kind of misconstrue that as because of the randomness problem, we don't need to do anything like this because everything is random anyways. So just a comment there. Now you mentioned in the barriers some consultancies.
Sure.
Would you please shed some more light on that?
Okay, any consultants in the house from the big four? Okay, so there's a couple of issues. One is, as many people pointed out, one of the things about consultants is essentially they're paid for getting work. Right, that's their business model. They're paid for time it from the client. They're not necessarily paid for doing if what their advice or what they do works. Now that again, consultants say to me, that's not my fault. The client won't pay for the valuation. Okay. So, but that is the business model. The other business model they have is about new stuff. So consultants is, not all, but typically will invent a new product or service, or whatever it is. They will then saturate the market. It's like employee engagement. They'll saturate the market, everyone's got it. And once everyone's got it, our business model is that we need to find a new thing. And so, by dint of the way they make their money and produce things, they add to this problem. However, it's not their fault. People are buying it. So buy beware and all that kind of thing. So I think consultants, in my experience, generally not always get in the way of this. And indeed, you would think, or might you think, a management consultancy might pick this up. And I thought, for years I was quite surprised, and I thought, I'm so naive. The reason they won't, particularly if it's a big one, is because then their clients will start asking questions about all their other products and services. Do you know that thing you did for us? Where's it? No. So I think there's a risk in a consultancy adopting this model because it will undermine a lot of the stuff they do. So in general, they don't have to be, you couldn't have to control. So yeah, I think they kind of get in the way, but it's not, I'm not blaming them. It's about the system. Thank you.
Hello. One of the challenges I think is happening in wider society is suspicion and rejection of experts.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges I see with evidence-based management, especially when you're putting together a recommendation for an approach or an intervention that a company should take, is that often the barrier or the refusal to accept that comes from a gut reaction rather than a considered thought. Have you any thoughts or considerations about that as one of your key barriers?
Yes, I think it's a good question. So the first thing is, in a way, and a British politician called Michael Gove said this, and I don't agree with him about anything else, but he did say we shouldn't trust experts. And there's actually something in that. As I said before, if you know a hell of a lot about a subject, you're going to be pretty biased. Which is why in other fields like medicine, when they're doing sort of reviews of scientific evidence, they may go to the experts for advice and opinion, but they make it very clear that's what it is, and often get people to review a field who actually don't know anything about it, because they can be less biased. The other thing you said about gut is I think you're right, and there's a quote which someone will probably know, I only came across it the other day. It's something like, an opinion or view that's been arrived at without using evidence cannot be contradicted by applying more evidence onto it. And I think there's something in that. So I think sometimes when people just think something is a great idea and they really want to do it, like my banana guard, throwing lots of evidence at them probably won't change their mind. What will, I don't know. And there's a different kind of question. I think that's a more meta thing about helping people think about the way they got to the decisions and choices they made rather than attacking a particular one, because it can entrench people. For example, an example is things like MBTI. Any fans of MBTI in the house? Probably NTJPF, whatever. Yeah. So, for example, I had lots of discussion with people about that, and if you start to critique it, they actually dig in even harder. So I think it's about thinking in a more meta way about the way they're using stuff. But yeah, you're right. Gut's big, as it were.
Hi. So to your point about consultants, can you suggest a way to start undermining that power structure? Or is it just like a generational thing, you just have to wait for everyone else to...
The power structure in terms of the way consultancies work, or...
Yeah, and sort of with the advice they offer.
Yeah, so occasionally we've given advice to organisations who are tendering to consultancies to do a piece of work. And one thing you can say to them is, why don't you ask them these kinds of questions? So as part of the tender we want to know the scientific evidence behind this, your own data, your own evaluations, etc., etc. Of course, if you do that, you don't get many tenders. People run away. But my guess is if organisations consistently said we're going to start asking different kinds of questions because I want to tender, I think it would start to change the consultancy market. People think I can't just walk in and say, oh, we did this for Google. it won't work anymore. So we need to up our game a bit. And indeed, some consultants have said to me they would actually like that. They feel it would help them provide a better service. And actually then some consultants say, look, it's not our fault, the clients want this stuff. You know? But yeah, apart from the customer pushing back, as it were, I'm not sure that the consultants will change themselves. Yeah, thank you.
We probably have time for just one more question.
There's one down here.
Hi, I'm not in HR, but
You wish you were.
not quite. Some professions have this thing called a body of knowledge,
Yeah.
which is an authoritative source,
Yeah.
tested and verified or analysed,
Sure.
reviewed, peer-reviewed information that shows what works and what
Yeah.
doesn't. Any comments on how that could be applied or might be being applied?
Yeah. Okay, so do you mean review of the scientific evidence in particular?
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, it's a really good point. So it's true that in medicine, for example, there are systematic reviews around practice questions that practitioners can get hold of and try and apply in their practice, and checklists to form and all that kind of thing, and in other social care fields as well. That doesn't exist in management. So as a manager, if you want to quickly get hold of a sort of more objective, systematically summarised overview of the scientific evidence, that isn't there yet. It's changing a little bit. A few journals are starting to do that, which I think is useful. I think it's kind of essential. The slight downside sometimes to that what works question is it's what works for what exactly. And sometimes people say to me or ask me, so Rob, what's the area of management where there's the best evidence for interventions? And I go, well, that's like me going to a doctor and saying, which operation seems to work really well? And the doctor said, well, knee replacements are good. Okay, I have a knee replacement now. Because the point about evidence-based practice, you don't start with evidence. It's not about evidence, it's about trying to resolve problems and opportunities. You always start with the problem. But I totally agree, without accessible, systematic reviews of scientific evidence as one of four sources, it's pretty hard to incorporate that into your practice. So I agree, yeah. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Rob Briner for coming all the way.
Thank you.